Africa हमारी Amina of Zaria Jizai soki Pidustan shimna janverer wakia irse pichho This is cinematic African royal and powerful Stay Africa हमारी Amina of Zaria Stay Africa हमारी Amina of Zaria Stay Africa हमारी Amina of Zaria History waking up, destiny approaching Calabash precaution Settle quiet path begins underneath Royal lineage, nobility Birth of a legend Stay Africa हमारी Amina of Zaria Stay Africa हमारी Amina of Zaria Heavy war drums slamming Cry grows louder, dry sharply Optional chant Amina, Amina Army marching, conquest, claw Stay Africa हमारी Amina of Zaria Stay Africa हमारी Amina of Zaria One massive batonic spear clash Choir holds one long heroic note Victory, authority, immortality
Today, we're diving into the story of a historical figure who is, well, the very definition of a legend. We're talking about a warrior queen whose life feels like it was ripped straight out of an epic fantasy. Except, it's all true.
Just let that sink in for a second. We're talking about a time way before modern maps were ever drawn. In an age of incredibly powerful African kingdoms, one woman's impact was so huge, she literally reshaped the world around her. So who was she?
That's the name we're focused on today. A name that would one day build an empire. But to really understand the queen she became, we have to first understand the world that made the princess.
Okay, let's head back in time. We're going to the 16th century, to a part of West Africa that was just buzzing with wealth and power. And this wasn't just some random kingdom. It was a real hub of civilization.
So Zaza's power came down to one thing: location, location, location. It wasn't on the coast, it was this essential crossroads, deep inland. You can almost picture it like the heart of the continent, pumping goods and culture between the massive Sahara Desert to the north and the rich forest down south. It was, quite literally, the center of everything.
And right into this powerhouse kingdom, around the year 1533, Princess Amina is born. And her family? Oh, it's formidable. She isn't just any princess. She's the daughter of the actual ruler, Queen Bakwa Turunku, a leader known for being incredibly wise and forward-thinking. So leadership was basically in her DNA from day one.
And this was the world Amina grew up in. It was overflowing with prosperity. This was no quiet little village. We're talking about gold and salt, basically the currency of the ancient world, flowing through its markets. You had powerful horses for the cavalry, being traded right alongside luxury goods like fine cloth and kola nuts. Zaza was a commercial giant.
So here's the thing. Amina had it all. She could have spent her entire life wrapped in unimaginable luxury inside the palace walls. But for her, that just wasn't enough. Something else was calling her name. And this, right here, is where the legend really begins. Not with her royal birth, but with a conscious decision she made. A choice that would end up defining not just her own life, but the entire future of her kingdom.
I mean, the contrast couldn't be more clear. On one side, you have the life that was expected of her, learning palace etiquette, royal duties, a life of total comfort. And on the other side,
The life she actively chose, the dust and sweat of the training grounds, the heavy weight of a spear in her hands. She turned her back on the easy path to pick up a weapon.
Now, choosing that path is one thing. Actually walking it, that's something else entirely. Her transformation from a princess into a warrior was just this incredible display of pure, raw determination.
She wasn't just taking riding lessons. No, she was out there training day in and day out with the kingdom's most elite soldiers, right alongside the cavalry.
And get this, she was using spears that were heavier than what most of the men could even lift. This tells you everything about her physical strength and her commitment. This wasn't some princess playing dress-up. She was building herself piece by piece into a real warrior.
Can you just picture that? The toughest, most experienced fighters in all of Zaria just standing there in stunned silence as this young woman, this princess, beat them at their own game, over and over. That's how you earn respect. Not because of who your parents are, but because your skill is just undeniable. And this one detail, this tells you everything you need to know about her grit. This wasn't a hobby for her. It was a painful, relentless obsession with being the best, and the proof was literally etched into her own hands.
All of that hard work, all that training, it all added up to a powerful statement of who she was. An identity defined not by how she was born, but by who she decided to become.
Look, that part was her fate. It was her inheritance, a simple fact of her birth that she had zero control over. But this was her destiny, a destiny that she forged with her own two hands, through sweat, through pain, and through an absolutely unbreakable will. She wasn't defined by the crown she was handed, but by the spear she chose to pick up.
And really, that's the core of her entire legend. Everything that came later, the conquests, the great walls, the empire she built, it all started right here. Not with a birthright, but with a choice. It just goes to show you history isn't only made by people born to rule. It's made by those who have the courage to redefine what ruling even means. The princess was made. The queen was now ready.
This is a story about pure ambition, about power, and about a leader who was literally forged by war. This is the story of the incredible Queen Amina.
So let's just start with that question. What actually forges a queen? I mean, really think about it. Is it just birthright? Some kind of destiny? Or is it something else entirely? Are they forged in fire? Okay, so let's set the scene. The year is 1566. We're in the kingdom of Zaria. Their queen, Bakwa, passes away, and her son, Karama, is the one who takes the throne. And, things were pretty peaceful, but something else was brewing. A kind of fire was stirring inside the new king's sister, a woman named Amina. Now, you have to understand, Zaria was basically this little island of calm in a massive raging sea of chaos. We're not talking about small squabbles over borders here. No, this was an age of constant, brutal war, a time where entire kingdoms could just be swallowed whole. I mean, you had these huge geopolitical titans, right? Like the once mighty Songhai Empire. They were rising and falling, creating these massive power vacuums. And that just sent shockwaves of chaos and instability through the entire region. Even the trade routes, the very lifeblood of the economy,
They became battlegrounds. Think about it. Controlling those routes meant controlling the money and the power. So yeah, everyone was fighting for a piece of that action. And this conflict, it wasn't just between these far-off, distant empires. It was personal. It was local. You had neighbor turning on neighbor. City fighting city, all of them scrambling for the same resources, the same land, the same bit of dominance. It was truly survival of the fittest. Entire kingdoms could just vanish, wiped off the map, gobbled up by a stronger rival. The stakes, they could not have been higher. So, in the middle of all this chaos, what's Princess Amina doing? She's watching. She sees the world for exactly what it is, a threat. And she decides, nope, I'm not going to be a passive observer in this. Her own internal fire, well, it burned hotter than any of the wars raging around her. And she prepared for 10 years. Just let that sink in. A full decade. While her brother is sitting on the throne ruling in relative peace, Amina, she was preparing for war. And this wasn't some theoretical thing, reading books in a library. She was out there, on the front lines. She was leading cavalry units, planning actual military campaigns. She was mastering the art of war for real. She was earning her stripes right there in the thick of it. And then it happens. After a decade of this relentless preparation, the moment arrives. Her brother, the king, he dies. And suddenly, the throne of Zazzau is empty. A power vacuum. And that is the most dangerous moment for any kingdom. So, what happens now? In an age of bloody power grabs, what are the warriors going to do? The generals, the people with the swords, they have the real power. And they're the ones who've been watching her, training with her, seeing her brilliance up close for 10 long years. They bowed. That's it. Just like that. No argument, no fight for the throne. They simply bowed. They knew. They knew her proven competence on the battlefield was worth more than tradition, more than gender, more than anything else. And with that, for the very first time in the history of Zazzau, a woman became Saraunya, the queen. And listen, we're not talking about a queen consort or some temporary regent. We're talking about the absolute ruler, chosen not because of her bloodline, but because she had proven without a doubt that she was ready for war. Which kind of leaves us with this final thought, right? Amina didn't just sit around and wait for destiny to find her. She spent a decade actively becoming the person who was ready for it. So it really makes you wonder, when your moment comes, will you be ready? Legendary Queen Amina of Zazzau. It's a story of absolute power, of relentless conquest, and an empire built on a simple, kind of brutal truth, that war can create immense wealth. So get this, just a few months after becoming queen, her reign didn't kick off with celebrations or big decrees. Nope, it began with the thunder of marching feet, a massive gathering of forces that was about to reshape the entire region. And that one single act, riding to war, it set the tone for the next 3 decades of her rule. There was absolutely no hesitation. The second she got power, she started using it to build an empire. All right, so let's start at the very beginning of her military campaign. You gotta understand, this was never just about defending borders. This was about forging an empire from the ground up. And to do that, well, first, you need an army. Right from the get-go, Amina commanded a massive force, 20,000 soldiers. Now, to put that into perspective for you, this was no small raiding party. This was a professional army, built and trained for one single purpose, conquest. But it wasn't just about the numbers. Amina's army had a serious technological edge. Her soldiers were decked out in iron helmets and chainmail, all forged by Zazzau's own master metalworkers. This heavy armor gave them a huge, decisive advantage on the battlefield. With this incredible army at her back, she didn't just win a battle here or there. Oh no, she launched an entire era of non-stop, relentless military expansion.
34 years. Just let that number sink in. That's what defines her reign. For over 3 decades, Zaza was in a state of pretty much constant war. I mean, imagine an entire generation born and raised knowing nothing but conquest under their warrior queen. And after 34 years of that, well, the outcome was inevitable. Her momentum was just unstoppable. Entire cities were subjugated. Kings bent the knee. Resisting her wasn't really an option. And here you can really see the sheer geographic scale of what she was building. She pushed the borders of Zazo farther than any ruler before her, conquering major city-states like Kano and Katsina, and stretching her influence all across Hausaland and even further. But all this constant warfare, it wasn't just for glory or for territory. It was a really smart economic strategy. Amina was forging what's called a tribute empire, which is basically a self-sustaining system where conquest directly pays for, well, everything.
So how in the world did she manage all this new land? She used a system of vassal states. See, instead of trying to directly rule every single city she conquered, she made them subordinate. They could keep some of their local control, but they had to pay for that privilege. And this tribute meant a constant river of immense wealth flowing into Zazao. We're talking gold, valuable kola nuts, but and this is so important to understand, this prosperity came at a staggering human cost. The tribute also included enslaved people and eunuchs, a brutal reality of her economic model. Her whole war machine was fueled by this stream of both wealth and human lives.
The direct result of this whole strategy was just mind-boggling. Her capital city, Zaria, was totally transformed. It became the undisputed commercial hub of the entire region, a powerhouse of trade made possible only by the spoils of war. And this really brings us to the heart of Queen Amina's legacy, doesn't it? This inseparable link between brutal, constant warfare and the incredible prosperity it brought her kingdom. They are two sides of the exact same, very powerful coin. So on one side of that coin, her legacy is crystal clear. She was an absolute force of nature on the battlefield, a commander who just systematically crushed any and all opposition. And right here is the other side. For her own people, inside her borders, all that military dominance created tremendous wealth and stability. The two are completely intertwined. One was the direct cause of the other. You simply don't get one without the other in her story.
So, what's the ultimate result of this 34-year reign? What are we left with? It's an indomitable legacy that created a whole new benchmark for what power even looked like in the region.
For centuries after she was gone, rulers in Hausaland were measured against the standards she set. She fundamentally redefined what was possible for a leader, combining absolute military might with a razor-sharp economic strategy to build a true, lasting empire. And really, that's the complex question her story leaves us with. It forces us to look beyond simple labels and really grapple with the brutal, complicated relationship between power, wealth, and war. So I'll leave you with this. What is the true legacy of prosperity when it's forged in conflict?
You know, when we think about the great leaders in history, our minds usually jump to conquerors, right? People who won battles and expanded their empires. But the story of Queen Amina of Zaza, well, it teaches us a really important lesson about power. Winning the war is actually just the beginning. The real test is what you do next.
And that, right there, is the fundamental problem for any leader. How do you take a military victory, which can be temporary, and turn it into a stable, lasting empire? I mean, how do you actually hold on to what you've won? For Amina, the answer wasn't going to be another battle. It was something way more permanent.
That's it. Two simple words that hold the key to her entire strategy.
Instead of just pushing outward, she turned her focus inward. She decided to consolidate her power and secure her legacy in a way that was, well, truly monumental.
So let's dive into this grand design, because what she built was on a scale that's honestly hard to wrap your head around. This was not a few forts here and there. This was a massive architectural vision meant to completely redefine her empire.
All across her lands, she ordered the construction of these massive earthen fortifications. Now, these weren't like the stone castles you see in Europe. Nope. These were colossal walls made of packed earth stretching for miles. And they became known as Queen Amina, which literally just means Amina's walls.
And this is a really crucial point. These walls weren't just built around the cities that were already there. They were so enormous, so dominant in the landscape, that they fundamentally reshaped the very cities they were meant to protect. They became a new reality on the ground.
Okay, but this is where the story gets really, really cool. Because we have to look past the obvious, right? Yeah, walls are for defense. But for Queen Amina, that was almost just a side benefit. These walls were actually a sophisticated tool of government with a much, much deeper purpose.
Her strategy was kind of three-pronged. The walls served an economic purpose by protecting markets, a political purpose by controlling trade, and maybe most importantly, a huge psychological purpose by symbolizing her absolute power.
So first up, the economy. By fortifying the major commercial hubs in her empire, Amina basically created these zones of safety and stability. And think about it, in an uncertain world, a safe marketplace is like a magnet for merchants. This spurred economic growth and kept her subjects prosperous. But the walls did more than just protect. They also controlled. See, every trade caravan, every merchant, every single good coming in or out had to pass through gates that were controlled by her people. This let her regulate, tax, and channel the wealth of the entire region right into her government's hands. The walls were basically giant funnels for commerce and power.
And that brings us to the most abstract, but maybe the most important function of all. Just imagine you're living there. Every single day you wake up and you see these massive, man-made mountains on the horizon. They were a constant physical reminder of the Queen's authority and her power to literally shape the world around you.
So let's just break that down a little more, because, it's one thing to say a wall symbolizes power, but it's another thing to understand how it actually creates that authority and respect. I mean, really think about that for a second. How does a simple structure made of dirt translate into something as complex as political loyalty? Well, the answer isn't just in the wall itself. It's in the act of building it. And here's the brilliant logic. To build something on this insane scale, you have to organize and mobilize tens of thousands of workers. Just being able to command that much labor is a raw, undeniable display of power. And that power, in turn, inspires loyalty from your followers and commands respect, or let's be honest, probably fear, from your rivals. So the crucial takeaway here is, these weren't temporary battlefield defenses. They were built to last for generations, to outlive every single person who worked on them. Right from the start, they were meant to be a permanent statement about her rule.
And the incredible thing is, her vision totally worked. Centuries later, you can still see parts of Gandwar Amina. They've survived the rise and fall of other empires, just standing there as silent witnesses to the power and the foresight of the queen who had them built. So when we look at these ancient structures, we have to remember the core lesson from Queen Amina's story. They were never just about defense. They were monuments to her reign. Every single one was a declaration, written in earth and sweat, that her power wasn't temporary. It was foundational, it was enduring, and it would be remembered forever.
And that leaves us with a pretty powerful question to think about. We might not build giant earthen walls anymore, but we're all building legacies of some kind. So what are the monuments, physical or otherwise, that our society is building today? And you have to wonder, centuries from now, what are they going to say about us?
Conquest power. Army marching conquest power. Army marching conquest power. Army marching conquest power. Army marching conquest
The whole legend of Queen Amina really boils down to this one single defiant choice. See, back in 16th century Hausa, marriage for a ruler wasn't about love, it was business. It was the tool for political deals, for forging alliances, for securing power. And Amina? She just rejected the entire system. She would not be property. Period.
And this wasn't just about refusing ownership, It was about rejecting any constraint on her absolute authority. Any tie, any alliance, any relationship that could possibly limit her power or her freedom to move, to conquer, well, that was a tie she simply refused to accept. These two ideas right here, they're the very foundation of her incredible story.
So, how did this profound refusal to be tied down become the central pillar of her epic legend? Let's get into it in our first section, A Queen Without Chains.
Okay, just take a second to think about how radical this actually was. For any monarch back then, especially a queen, to refuse marriage was like throwing out the entire political playbook. It meant saying no to the standard way of making alliances, having heirs, and securing a dynasty. It was just an unprecedented move.
And that, of course, leads to the big question, doesn't it? If she's casting aside the main tool everyone used for building power, what was her alternative? How did she not only survive, but actually thrive and massively expand her empire?
Well, her alternative wasn't just a simple no. It was a calculated, incredibly daring strategy. And strength without surrender captures her unique approach to conquest and power perfectly.
So her method became this legendary cycle, almost like a ritual of power. Here's how it went. First, she'd win a victory in battle. Then, instead of some political marriage, she would form a temporary personal alliance, taking a husband from the ranks of the very men she had just conquered. But, and this is the absolute key, by dawn, he was dismissed. The connection was severed. She kept her power, she kept her freedom, and she rode on to the next conquest.
This wasn't random, not at all. Every single action served this one purpose. She would take whatever she needed from her conquests, resources, land, even temporary companionship, but she would never, ever surrender her own authority in the deal. It was a masterclass in how to maintain absolute sovereignty.
So what was the result of this radical life, this incredible strategy? Well, that takes us to her powerful legacy and our final section, A Woman Like a Man. The effects of her reign were just profound. To her enemies, her name alone was a weapon. It inspired fear before her armies even showed up. But to her own people, her undeniable strength and constant string of victories commanded this fierce, unwavering loyalty. And her story, this unbelievable legend of the unmarried warrior queen, it became so powerful it couldn't be contained, spreading way beyond the borders of her own kingdom.
And in the end, it all led to this. This wasn't just a casual description. It was a title. An honor given to her that captured the very essence of who she was. In a world that was completely defined by patriarchal rules, she just shattered every single expectation, proving that things like capability, strength, and leadership, they have no gender.
So Amina's legend, then, it's really more than just some old story from the history books. It's a question that still hits home today, right? What does it actually mean to be truly sovereign? In our own lives, how do we take strength without ever surrendering our power?
Victory, authority, immortality. Victory, authority, immortality. Just a mighty African royal hall. Just a mighty victory, Lord, all power. Amina, 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 Amina.
Wow, I mean, that one sentence, it says it all, doesn't it? It's not just how a life ended, it's the whole point of the life itself. So it really makes you ask, who was the woman who earned an epitaph that powerful?
Her name is Amina. She was a 16th century Hausa warrior queen from the area we now know as Nigeria. But to really get a sense of her life, we've got to start with how her legacy was cemented forever, long after she was gone.
Right, so a story this powerful couldn't just stay in books. It had to be given a real physical form.
a permanent reminder of her strength, something literally forged in metal and held in memory.
If you go to Lagos, Nigeria, you can see her statue standing there today. And it's brilliant because it captures her spirit perfectly. See, she's not sitting on some throne, she's on horseback, spear raised, always looking out toward the next battle, the next horizon. It's a monument to someone who was always in motion, always pushing forward.
Okay, let's dive into this, because to truly understand who Queen Amina was, we have to look at the one moment that says everything about her entire identity. The moment she died.
Her story doesn't wrap up in a quiet palace room. No. It ends out on the road, on the march, deep in territory she was still fighting for. She was always moving, always expanding. And this is what's so amazing. Think about it. Most rulers die in comfort, right? In safety. But that just wasn't her way. Her real throne was the saddle, and her kingdom was the battlefield itself. She was a hands-on commander right up to the very end. I mean, her life was basically one long 34-year campaign. It's almost fitting that she would fall right there, in the middle of her life's work. And that right there, that's the final, unforgettable image. The symbol of her power and her spirit was with her until her very last breath. Her death wasn't a defeat. It was the ultimate statement of who she was. So, an ending that dramatic creates a story that just refuses to die. Let's take a look at how that one single moment helped build a legacy that's lasted for more than 400 years. Her story basically flowed down two powerful rivers. On one side, it was written down in histories like the famous Kano Chronicles, which anchored it in fact. But on the other, it lived in the spoken word, in the stories passed from parent to child, generation after generation. And that's what gave her legend its fire. It's that mix of history and legend that makes her story so unstoppable. So, what's at the heart of this legacy? Well, first, she completely shattered the idea that your gender decides if you can lead. She proved it's about skill, courage, and vision. Period. Second, her life is just this undeniable proof that powerful women were shaping politics and war in Africa way before colonialism. And finally, she became this timeless symbol, not just for what women had done, but for their absolutely limitless potential. And make no mistake, this isn't some dusty old story. The spirit of Queen Amina isn't a relic. It is a living, breathing force that you can still feel all across the continent and the world today. You can hear her echo in every single woman who stands up and speaks out, who refuses to be quieted and demands to have her voice heard. You can see her spirit in any leader, man or woman, who just pushes against what everyone says is possible, who just won't accept the limits that other people try to set. And you can feel her presence in every story, just like hers, that fights to be told, that challenges the official version of events and carves out its own space in our memory. Because, in the end, ruling a kingdom is temporary. Power can fade. But Queen Amina of Zaria did something so much bigger. She used her life to forge an identity that would last forever, literally carving her name into the bedrock of history. And her life really leaves us with that question, doesn't it? It wasn't just about winning battles. It was about living with so much purpose that your story becomes immortal. What does it really take for a life to echo forever?
Before empires fell, a queen was. Use this in tools like Suno, Audio, Eva, Soundra, or It Music, yeah. Epic music, yeah. Music إلهي إن جورك جنبري أبصر دهار جنو or Amina of Zaria. No lyrics, change story.